In this series, Herd Strategies President Denise Hurd connects with industry leaders and community members to discuss the challenges they face within their fields. Join us bi-weekly to learn all about how they see us.
Hi, my name is Denise Hurd, and welcome back to another episode of How They See Us. If you're just joining us for the first time, we're so glad you're here. And if you're a returning listener, welcome back, and thank you for your continued support. Today's conversation is especially meaningful as we will reflect on the upcoming Juneteenth holiday. It's a time to honor the legacy of freedom and resilience and the generations of Black Americans who carried our history forward, often against all odds. Joining us for this powerful conversation is Eunice Trotter, a respected journalist, historian, and the director of the Indiana Landmarks Black Preservation Program. Eunice has dedicated her entire life to uncovering untold stories and preserving the legacy of Black Hoosiers across the state. Because we have so much to cover, this will be a two-part episode because there's just a lot. There's a lot to discuss. So in part one, we'll dive into the history and the cultural significance of Juneteenth. And in part two, we'll talk more specifically about Indiana Landmarks preservation efforts and the role we all play in honoring Black heritage. Eunice, thank you so much for being here. And so I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and I want you to tell our listeners a little bit about the work that you are doing at Indiana Landmarks.
Well, Denise, thank you for allowing me to be here to discuss these various subjects that are so near and dear to me personally and professionally. I have been in the journalism business most of my career. But even in that regard, in journalism, we looked at that as the first draft of history capturing. We wrote the early stories about various issues, and those stories soon became sources of historical research. So I've always been in this business, so to speak. And then I've always had an interest in genealogy because of my own family members' interest in genealogy. I was one of those kids who listened to the old folks' stories and was ordered out of the room on many occasions.
This is grown folks talk.
Yeah, this is grown folks. But I still kind of hang around and listen in.
Oh, you were one of them.
Yeah,
okay.
I was definitely like, and so, I got to learn a lot about my own family history. Which has deep roots here in Indiana. So my family, I've been able to record here back to the late 1700s.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
And so it's in capturing that information, I learned history about Indiana. I always say that a lot of young people don't have interest in history because they can't connect with it.
Yeah, that's very true. That's interesting because that's how I was, but my sister was always very fascinated by history, and so of course that's her career now, and now I've had an awakening, so I totally get it because I see the connections, how everything is all interconnected and tying all the dots together. Again, thank you for being here. I want to have a conversation right now about Juneteenth, because that's a holiday that we've been celebrating as a nation for the past several years. It's coming up this month, in the month of June. And so I want you to provide our listeners with an understanding or just an explanation of what exactly is Juneteenth and why is it so important for us to celebrate?
Well, let's go back to 1863.
Okay.
This was right when the Civil War was ending, and enslaved people all over the South were being released from servitude. And this wasn't something that happened suddenly all at once. It was gradual, plantation by plantation by plantation. And as 1865 came, this continued to be the process. The holdout state was Texas. And Texas refused to release people who were enslaved. So it required military intervention to enforce President Lincoln's emancipation Proclamation order. And interestingly, United States colored troops from Indiana were part of the forces that were sent to Galveston, Texas, to emancipate those people. They were members of the 28th, which was an Indiana-based troop.
Wow.
And that troop, in fact, returned after that emancipation to Indianapolis. And many of them settled on the south side in the Norwood area of Indianapolis, which had already included African American residents. It was not a part of Indianapolis at that time. So with weapons in hand, they went to Galveston and required the plantation holders to release these people. Just think about that, though. You are on a plantation. You don't know your way around the city or the state, and you're suddenly told, go, make it on your own. There were no resources given to these people, nothing. You just get out and go. Some of the people were offered jobs to stay on at these plantations, of course, receiving wages that probably were far less than what they should have received. But they were afforded some resources as a result of those job offers. And so it only became a national holiday, June 19th, in the last several years.
Yeah, probably.
And it took 20 years, I believe, for it to be
recognized. Kind of like what happened with the MLK holiday. How it took so long for it to be realized. And I want to talk about it. This, Juneteenth being a nationally recognized holiday. Now with the climate that we're in, do you think? Well, first of all, let me ask you: what do you think prompted the broader recognition? What prompted the federal government to make it a national holiday?
Well, there were a number of forces that came together at that time to make it a holiday, including civil unrest around the country.
Oh, yes. That was during COVID. It was during a COVID time period.
Yes.
So we're not 5 years removed from it being a nationally recognized holiday.
No, not. So what is interestingly, I was in Brown County last year. Because in the minds of non-African Americans, the feeling is that holiday is for Black people. And during my talks around the state, I've emphasized that this is everyone's holiday. And the reason that it's everyone's holiday is because it ended the war.
Right.
And in the war, during the Civil War, thousands of white people were killed. Isn't that something to celebrate? That we are no longer at war killing one another, brother against brother in some cases, city against city. And so Brown County, Indiana is one of the few counties in the state that now officially recognizes Juneteenth as a paid holiday for the county workers. So through, just educating people about it, that came about. So that was really a win-win for us. The city of Indianapolis doesn't do it as a paid holiday.
Oh, I did not realize that.
And definitely the state doesn't.
And the state doesn't. Oh, no. Oh, no.
No. And I think we're going to, going forward, have to hang on to that progress, particularly in today's political climate, so that it can continue to be recognized as a paid holiday.
Interesting. Let me ask you something. I want to still stay on this Juneteenth conversation, but why is it important not to just connect Juneteenth as a national holiday? And you touched on it with Brown County, and you touched on it with the being a paid holiday across the county and unpaid holiday in Marion County. But there are many reasons why this is important to our state. And I want to go back and expound upon that. You talked about that we had soldiers that came from Indiana that went down to Texas to help get that message across and help those individuals find their way to freedom. And since they did not know that they were free, I would love to know, are there more stories of that kind about Indiana's impact with respect to Juneteenth that we just don't know about? Because we all know, we were talking about this before we got started, once we realize how we are connected, then we suddenly have more interest. It makes it easier for us to connect the dots. How can we make Hoosiers connect the dots even further to understand why Juneteenth should be so important to all of us?
Well, Juneteenth was not recognized as a holiday for generations in Indiana. However, Indiana did recognize Emancipation Day. And it initially was recognized in September of every year. So large and small communities around the state would have celebrations. And it was called Emancipation Day. It became January 1st.
I remember that.
And has been observed around the state as that day, and still is.
It still is. Right,
Yeah,
it still
being
is.
recognized.
There's always a
as
church
that day.
service that
Yeah,
day.
there's
Big
always
church
a
service.
yes. Usually, well, here in Indianapolis, it's held at St. John Missionary Baptist Church. So, but it recognized that same history of freedom, and of it being recognized by the government and by America. Period. So, the importance of that is that without that recognition of freedom, where would we be? You would think, oh, why do we need to have it stated and said? Well, it becomes official, I believe, with that recognition on a state or government level. And, it's celebrated different ways. Some people do it quietly, people do it in church. It used to be done in a few communities that I know of at their fairgrounds. And they would have big celebrations with the communities, black, white, coming together. There'd be food and music and, all the things that you would think of that go along with celebratory events. And it would be one day. And it would be called Emancipation Day. So, it's part of our history.
Yeah.
And it's somewhat uncomfortable for a lot of Americans to even think about having to observe that kind of a holiday. But it is also, it's a significant part of our foundation of this nation and who we are.
Right.
So if we forget those basics, and we say that those don't matter, then, what else doesn't matter?
Right. Because we're opening up the door to us to cast away anything.
Yeah, and we're looking at that happening.
Right before our very eyes.
Yes.
Right before our very eyes.
Yes.
I'd love to know your thoughts about the misconceptions or overlooked truths about emancipation and freedom that you wish more people understood. I think you've touched on it a little bit.
Yeah, well, one big one is that, that was the day everybody was released, and
Right.
they all went ready to wow. It was like this instant, spontaneous thing. You're free. No, it was a process. It didn't happen that one day, even June 19th. There was so much reluctance by individuals who held slaves to prevent them from knowing about this proclamation by the president of this country, because they needed that labor. So that was one of the major misconceptions. And then also the fact that, the people who were released were suddenly, off into la la land, living life happily ever after. It was a tortuous moment in history that people had to then realize you have to take care of yourself, and this is how you do it. I mean, you think about an infant.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
Being told at 5 years old, go take care of yourself.
And earn a living.
Doing it. And be a part of this community.
Right.
And be contributing.
Right.
And so that's a misconception too, that, this was a moment in time when everybody just, did what they were supposed to do, and they went on down the road, lived happily ever after. They did not. They struggled. And that struggle really continues today. There were generational consequences of enslavement that we still deal with today, and they include social, emotional, psychological, financial, and every other way you can think of. So there's a feeling that, well, you're free now. That's history. That didn't happen to you. That happened to generations back.
I think one of the best depictions I've seen that really clearly defines or describes what you just explained is the film Emancipation with Will Smith on Apple TV. And it is a brilliantly done film. And it's one that I think that everyone should watch because it tells the story of, it follows a slave's journey after being freed, and he knew he was freed, yet he was being hunted. And so it was an amazing story. And so that's what you just narrated, the fact that it wasn't like, okay, you're free, go. It was, because they were still captured and tried to be returned back to, it was a fight for freedom, not just a, hello, we're free kind of situation. Let me ask you something else, because we've had a great conversation about this, but I want to talk about where we are now with respect to emancipation, because a lot of people say, we're not emancipated. We're not emancipated. We've not made a lot of progress. We're in a different form of slavery in today's society. And so I would love to know your thoughts on, freedom sometimes doesn't really equal equality. You be free, but you may not be equal. And so how do you see Juneteenth as a reflection of both progress? Because there has been progress made. I'm not trying to say that we have not moved forward as a nation and we have not moved forward as a people. But I would love to know your thoughts on how do you see Juneteenth as a reflection of both progress and both unfinished work?
Well, I look at what we're living with today as just a lesser degree, if you will, of enslavement. Enslavement was replaced with incarceration. Yes. So that the same benefit of enslavement is generated through incarceration. Free labor, for example, is one of the outcomes of incarceration today versus enslavement of yesterday. Mm-hmm. It has been dealt with all over the country and still is being dealt with in terms of why these numbers are tilted so against African American men to be the majority of the population of these prisons. The perception is, however, that that's because African American men commit more crime. I was just looking at some FBI statistics the other day that just blew that notion out of the water.
Well, we've always said that.
Yeah, and so we know that as a people, but there's the perception that that is the case. We do not have the same access, just like during the times of enslavement, to jobs, to places where we live, places where our children are being educated, to you name it. There's no area that does not have that taint of the vestiges of enslavement, because still to this day there's a perception that these people who were enslaved, our ancestors, were not people. We were property. So how can you make equal a couch or a cow to a human?
Kind of like what is going on now with respect to our lieutenant governor and his comments most recently. Was that like a little point, like a finger point towards, So, but some of you look it up if you don't know what I'm talking about. But we're that three-fifths thing.
Yeah, so. That thing though, that deals with everything has roots in money. That dealt with property. Yes. So, but there was a quote by MLK that people who remain silent are just as guilty as those who speak out. So we've had a lot of silence in Indiana about that, from you name it, from the governor on. So we still are fighting that fight. I tell people that I grew up as a Garveyite, and my dad was a Garveyite, and Indianapolis had a significant Garveyite population.
Really?
Yes.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it was headed by the owners of King and King Funeral Home,
Okay.
which recently got demolished, as will that history be.
And we're going to talk about that too. Don't give it away yet.
Yeah,
Make a note of that because we're going to talk about that.
Yeah,
We're gonna-
yeah. So, my father always, preached to us that the best thing you can do for your people is take care of yourself, and then everyone else follows who looks like you. And so that was. So we grew up very segregated, not anti-white or racist, but segregated. And that segregation afforded and still today could afford a level of protection for these communities that are facing these kind of issues that we're still dealing with as vestiges of slavery. And, you don't have to worry about whether a teacher is not calling on you because you're black or white when your teacher looks like you. You don't have to worry about whether you can move into that beautiful house when you live in your own neighborhood of beautiful homes and so forth. You don't have to worry about getting a job if you have your own businesses and jobs. So, and so that's how we grew up, that, you take care of yourself,
I'm smiling when you said that you grew up as a Garveyite because I remember being in high school giving a speech written by Marcus Garvey and the people almost falling out when because he had such strong viewpoints.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
He did. He was not, and there's always that misperception that he was racist, but
Right,
he was
wasn't.
not.
He was not. He was
no.
not.
And the Garveyism is not about
No.
racism
But
either.
you can imagine my little people at Burbuff High School when I'm talking about Marcus Garvey ready to stroke out. So conversation for
Yes,
another
sir.
day. But so
You are a rebuff.
I am. No, I know. Conversation for another day. They weren't ready for this little girl to deliver that message. But back to the message at hand. I want to close this out. I want to talk about a couple of things before we close out because we do have another part 2, and I want to talk about specifically the work that you are doing and really give us enough time to delve into that. But Juneteenth is coming. It's coming around the corner. And so I would love for you to share with our listeners things that they can do on that day to celebrate. I know you all have a pretty amazing event happening at Indiana Landmarks. And so I want you to talk about that, of course, and share how people can attend that and get involved.
Well, think about what you do for Independence Day.
Girl, no.
What's the saying? You're going to party like it's the 4th of
Right,
July.
sure. Yeah.
Let's party like it's Juneteenth.
Right.
I mean, you can do everything that you can imagine. It's a celebratory day. This year at Indiana Landmarks, on June 19th, we are going to have a celebration, but we're also going to be doing some educating.
Good.
We are concerned that a lot of our younger generation has not seen what we're seeing and about to see, and maybe not have the skill set to deal with it. For example, back in the day, when we had economic trying times, people did things like grow their own food. They used through the churches the resources there for childcare that they otherwise might not have been able to afford, and other kinds of strategies to be resilient and to get through. Will that happen today? We don't know if it will happen today, but we do need to be providing the skills for it to happen. Because the need will arise, and it is a rising.
It's already here.
Yeah,
It's already here.
People are out of work. People are looking. I've never had so many people calling looking for jobs.
Yeah.
As I've had just recently. So I don't know if it's because of the government layoffs or what, but they're out there. They're looking for work. So we're going to have a keynote speaker, Dr. Lasana Kazembe, who's going to talk about Black resilience and the history of it, because look, we have made it through the Middle Passage, we've made it through slavery, we made it through civil rights era, we've made it. So how do we continue to make it? What are the things we need to do? But not just make it in general, but how do we become more resilient spiritually? Because that is huge for us. Because of our spiritual resilience, we've been able to survive. Mentally, emotionally, are y'all gonna make me lose my mind and I go out here and start shooting up the neighborhood because, of what is going on in the community, and financially. So those are the 3 areas that we want to go in on, those 3 areas.
Good.
But before the actual presentation, which is free to the public, we're going to recognize who we call Black heritage heroes. One of whom is Marsh Davis, who was the now retired CEO of Indiana Landmarks, who created the Black Heritage Preservation Program, and Attorney Faye Williams, who I call the mother of Indiana's observance of Juneteenth, because she harped on that to get it here.
She did.
And she's in her 90s now, and she's resilient. She is one resilient woman. So we're going to recognize them, and also we'll announce our scholarship recipients and our interns.
That's wonderful.
We're going to have entertainment, Carl Hines Trio.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And also this young woman from Gary, Indiana. She calls herself Lady Sax. So we'll eat and drink and be merry, and we'll do that. And that will be for our sponsors and supporters and allies. And we want to really recognize and honor them, including you, Denise, and Herd Strategies, for supporting us, because this is our only fundraiser. This program that I manage provides grants to Black heritage organizations, or organizations that are focused on Black heritage sites. And those grants range from $500 up to $30,000 to preserve those.
I'm gonna stop you there, because we're gonna talk about that in part 2.
Oh,
I want
okay.
you to share, because I don't let the rabbit all the way out of the hat, because I want you to have more time to talk about that. But if people want to attend the event, how do they RSVP?
They can go to Eventbrite, go on Eventbrite, and put in the search bar Indiana Landmarks Juneteenth, and a form will pop up.
Okay, so
Now, if you want to come
IndianaLandmarks.com?
to the .org.
.org.
Yeah.
.org. Okay.
Yeah. Now, if you want to come to the reception and eat and drink and be merry
Call
and celebrate, give some money.
Yeah, give some money.
I don't care how much, just give some money to this program, because we need that.
No amount is too small. No amount is too small. All righty, Eunice, thank you so much. Thank you for talking about this important topic, this Juneteenth. And I go back to the film. Like, if you have Apple TV, watch Emancipation. It tells the story of Peter. And Peter is the gentleman that's in the photo. We all saw it in history, whipped Peter, and in that photo, Will Smith portrays whipped Peter, and you see whipped Peter's journey from slavery to knowing he's free to reconnecting with his family. But what's really poignant is that you see him have that photograph taken where he takes off his shirt and you see his back with the scars. And so it's an important film to watch, because we do need to understand history. We need to understand how things were, how things are, and how we can tie that all together. So I just thank you so much for this important conversation. So what we're going to do is we're going to pause here, but it's just the beginning. So be sure to tune into part 2 of our conversation, when we'll talk more about how Indiana Landmarks is preserving Black history across the state and the ways that you can get involved. So thank you again for joining us for part 1 of this special Juneteenth episode of How They See Us. We'll see you in part 2.